Graduation didn't feel like a celebration, it felt like a verdict. I stood behind the podium, facing a sea of gowns and eager families, the gold trim on my stole catching stage light. My hands rested lightly on the edge of the wood, steady, still, rehearsed. I wasn't here to perform joy. I was here to finish what started 6 years ago. 5th row, center aisle. I'd clocked them the second I walked out. Diane and Frank, my aunt and uncle, legal guardians, smiling like they'd earned something. Like this moment somehow reflected well on them. She wore soft lavender and a pearl necklace my mother once kept in a velvet pouch inside her vanity. He wore a navy suit with a pocket square that looked new, crisp, like it had never seen a courtroom or a creditor. They clapped as if they belonged here. But the invitations weren't mine to send. The university mailed them automatically to the next of kin listed on file. I never corrected it. I wanted them to come, because I wanted them to watch. Danielle Ray Lancaster, the announcer said, valedictorian, School of Business and Finance. I stepped forward, diploma in one hand, speech in the other. They lifted their phones. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I adjusted the mic. My name is Danielle, I said, voice steady. I'm 24 years old. My parents died when I was 16. I was taken in by family who promised to protect me. They told everyone they were doing their best, that I should be grateful. Several parents nodded, assuming they knew where this was going. They also promised to protect what my parents left behind: a house, a trust, some insurance money. I paused, looking out into the auditorium, but not at them. At 18, I discovered the account had been drained. Cars, cruises, a remodeled kitchen, vacations I wasn't invited on. My aunt's smile twitched. My uncle tilted his head, as if hearing something he couldn't quite process. On my 18th birthday, I was handed a checking account with $413 in it. The paperwork said, transferred to joint account, authorized by guardian. The word guardian lingered in the mic like smoke. Silence rippled through the audience. A few camera phones slowly lowered. I said nothing for 6 years, I continued. I put myself through school, took night shifts, paid rent, built credit, worked in tax law to understand exactly what they did and how to undo it. No emotion, just facts. I stand here today debt-free with 2 job offers, a published thesis, and my full legal name back on every record they tried to control. One student clapped, then stopped, unsure if it was the right moment. I looked toward row 5. Diane's knuckles had gone pale around her clutch. Frank sat too still, like a man trying not to flinch during a mugshot. They didn't know the speech was coming, but they knew exactly what I meant. Inheritance is not generosity, it's responsibility. Some people protect it, others exploit it. Some sign checks, others forge them. I saw someone shift uncomfortably 2 rows behind them. I wasn't here to expose anyone, I said, but I also wasn't raised to lie. Truth doesn't have to be loud to land. That line had been rewritten 7 times. I kept it cold, precise, clinical, like a financial audit. I'd like to thank my professors, my peers, and the one attorney who told me, if they treated you like property, treat them like a liability. A quiet laugh moved through the faculty row. But I didn't smile. Today is the last day I carry their name. That line landed harder than anything before it, not because of its sharpness, but because of its silence. The pause that followed said more than applause could. I stepped back, nodded once, and walked off stage. Backstage, the coordinator whispered, "That was powerful." I nodded again, didn't speak. I didn't need to, because that was the moment they learned. I wasn't the scared girl who begged them for grocery money. I wasn't the charity case they dressed up for Christmas cards. I wasn't the passive teenager who didn't know how to log into a bank account. I was the line they didn't see in the contract, the fine print they failed to read, and now they knew what it cost. They didn't have children of their own. At least, that's what they told everyone. That I was the daughter they never had. That they were so honored to step in when my parents died. That they were just doing what any decent family would do. But I learned early that there's a difference between saying your family and making someone feel it. The first few weeks after the funeral, everything felt hollow. The casseroles, the condolences, the clean, carpeted silence of their suburban home, so different from the noisy, book-filled warmth of my parents' apartment. Diane told me not to cry in public. Frank said grief made people uncomfortable. They let me keep my mother's necklace, but they sold her piano without telling me. I was 16, and apparently, a clean break would help. By 17, the script had shifted. I was lucky to have a roof. I ate more than they expected. I was so expensive for a teenager. It became the refrain of the house. A low, constant hum. By then, my trust fund had already begun bleeding out. I didn't know. I just knew Frank suddenly had a new Ford truck. Diane was flying to Scottsdale for wellness retreats. The guest room I slept in got turned into her home office. I was moved to the laundry room with a cot. She called it cozy. I called it a storage closet with a plug-in heater. In public, they beamed. At PTA meetings, church fundraisers, Christmas cards, they played the saints. Behind closed doors, I became the burden. The one who forgot to refill the filtered water. The one who used too much shampoo. The one who should be grateful the trust covers your tuition. Only it didn't. At my high school graduation, Diane stood next to me for the photo, but didn't clap when my name was called. I didn't notice then. I only remember now. Because the signs were always there. Quiet, subtle cuts you don't feel until you bleed out over years. Frank once told me, when I asked about my college fund, "Don't worry about money. That's for adults to manage." That was the moment I stopped asking, but not the moment I gave up. I got a job shelving books at the library, saved tips from tutoring underclassmen, taught myself to read bank statements in the back room, in silence, under fluorescent lights. The numbers didn't lie the way people did. That's when I started to suspect. One quarterly statement, addressed to the estate of Raymond and Kara Lancaster, had been opened and resealed. Another was missing entirely. When I asked Diane about it, she said, "You shouldn't stress about finances. It's not healthy for a girl your age." I didn't press. But I didn't forget. The only person who ever seemed to see me clearly was Ms. Elkins, my economics teacher. She once pulled me aside after class and said, "You're not invisible, Danielle. Don't let anyone make you believe you are." She wrote me a letter of recommendation without me asking, slipped it into my locker. "Just in case you decide to apply somewhere that values you," she'd scrawled in the margin. I kept that letter longer than I kept most things. Because sometimes when the people who raise you can't see your worth, all it takes is one person who can. And I was starting to realize I didn't need a house to feel at home. I needed space, space to breathe, to learn, to earn, and eventually, to sever. The day the betrayal became fact, not suspicion, was cold and quiet. I had just turned 18, legally an adult, legally entitled, or so I thought. Frank called me into the living room, a manila folder in his hand, and that same look he always wore when he was about to sound helpful and condescending at the same time. "We've been managing your finances for years," he said, waving the folder like it contained a favor. "Now that you're 18, we thought you'd like a look." Inside were 2 sheets of paper. One final bank statement with a balance of $413.09, and a signed withdrawal ledger showing dozens of transfers, large and small, dated over 3 years. Vacation expenses, landscaping work, jewelry, even tuition payments, but not for me. It was all legal. Every dollar had been drawn under the umbrella of guardian expenses. Every withdrawal had a note. Necessary upkeep. Mental health retreat. Family obligations. I stared at the ink. My name printed in the top left corner. My parents' names, faded on the originating trust documents, now meaningless in the shadow of a drained account. Diane brought me a cup of tea as if we were discussing curtains. "You're so talented," she said softly. "You'll make that back and more one day. This just helped us all survive." Then Frank added, "And we hope you'll be mature enough not to cause drama about it. Families stick together." The rage didn't erupt. It didn't scream. It calcified. I nodded, and I moved out that night. Not to anything glamorous. A shared apartment above a mechanic's shop with 3 other girls I barely knew. I worked weekends cleaning data entries for a failing insurance firm. During weekdays, I took community college courses and studied finance textbooks I couldn't afford, checking them out 5 days at a time, renewing them before they were overdue. I applied for every internship that didn't require pedigree. I worked in silence, logged hours, earned certifications one by one. By 19, I was assisting a fee-only fiduciary who didn't ask for my story, just results. By 20, I was enrolled in a transfer program. By 21, I was cold-calling clients for a boutique investment firm in Chicago, slowly building trust, portfolio by portfolio. I learned that money doesn't vanish. It migrates. And paper trails, when followed properly, always lead back to the people who thought no one would notice. Frank and Diane weren't wealthy by accident. They were strategic, but not smart. And that gave me leverage. I found the irregularities first. Not illegal, but suspicious. Transfers into third-party accounts listed under Diane's maiden name, cash advances drawn from ATMs miles from their stated residence, trust disbursement categories stretched beyond ethical norms. I documented everything. Quietly, patiently. I requested copies of the original estate instructions through probate court, then waited months for them to arrive. And when they did, I learned the truth. My parents had earmarked $112,000 for my education with strict restrictions. The money had been rerouted within 8 months of their deaths. When I presented the documentation to a pro bono financial abuse attorney, he asked just one question. "Are you ready for this to get ugly?" I said, "No. But I'm ready for it to get accurate." That was the pivot. Not toward revenge, toward correction. I didn't want them to suffer. I wanted them exposed. Because nothing forces accountability like daylight. And I was done living in the shadows of family. Correction came in phases. First, I filed the civil suit, quietly. No press, no calls, just a clean submission with notarized documentation, itemized asset reports, and a sworn statement detailing the misuse of my inheritance by my legal guardians, Frank and Diane Moore. I didn't need them to know it was coming. I needed them to see it arrive. The notice was served on a Tuesday. I didn't call to check if they received it. It had taken nearly a year to gather the paperwork. I waited through delays, rejections, and silence. By the time the filing was complete, I didn't feel fear. I felt math. Instead, I did what I always did, worked. By then, I was 24 and a licensed financial advisor at a mid-tier firm downtown. My portfolio was modest, my clients loyal, mostly single women, young professionals, and the occasional widow who didn't trust banks anymore. I never told them my story, but I think some of them sensed it. I'd answer questions with precision. I didn't sell dreams, I sold protection. I met Sam during a compliance audit. She was sharp, older, and not easily impressed, but she liked my risk reports and how I handled volatility. She became a mentor, then a partner. When she opened her own firm, I was her first hire. That was the beginning of my own empire. In parallel, the legal wheels turned, slow but steady. My attorney kept me updated in quarterly bullet points. Meanwhile, I kept building something they could never access. We didn't take clients who lied to their kids. We didn't tolerate fiduciary fraud. Our niche became transparency, our reputation, ruthless honesty. 2 years later, we were invited to speak at a financial ethics conference in Atlanta. I accepted. The panel was titled, "When Guardians Fail, Tracking Exploitation in Family Trusts." When I stepped on stage, I wore black, minimal makeup, hair back. I spoke clearly, professionally, without venom. I outlined the common signs: missing statements, sudden lifestyle inflation, emotionally coercive guardianship. I explained the legal gray zones, the loopholes, the psychological grooming that made teens like me doubt their instincts. And then I said it. Financial abuse doesn't always look like theft. Sometimes it looks like guardianship. Sometimes it looks like protection. And sometimes the people who promise to take care of you are really just caretakers of your silence. Frank and Diane weren't in the room, but they heard about it because the suit had gone public by then. A local journalist picked up the case and published a clean, fact-checked feature. Niece sues guardians for misuse of $112,000 inheritance. The comments were brutal. It had been 18 months since the initial filing. The verdict was sealed quietly, with restitution orders and a public reprimand. No dramatic cross-examinations, just receipts. Not because I fed them bitterness. I didn't give quotes. I didn't dramatize. I let the paper trail speak. But the community wasn't kind. Diane lost her position on a nonprofit board. Frank was removed from a local financial committee for reputational concerns. Old neighbors stopped calling. Their world, built on false virtue, began to collapse quietly. That's when the letter came. Handwritten, 8 pages, Diane's cursive. She never apologized for draining the account, but she did say, "We never meant to hurt you. We just didn't know how to raise someone like you. And at the very end, I should have treated you like my own." It wasn't enough, but it was honest. So I wrote back, "Thank you for acknowledging what I already survived. I accept your words, but I no longer accept your role in my life. Forgiveness, not reconciliation. Precision, not permission." The line had been drawn, not out of spite, out of clarity. And from that day forward, I stopped explaining myself, because what they stole no longer defined me. What I built in silence did. After the lawsuit closed, I never looked back. Not until the city's email arrived in my inbox 6 months later. Recognition not for what I lost, but what I changed. The gala invitation came from the city, an annual event honoring financial transparency advocates and whistleblowers. Sam was being recognized for her decades of work. I was named alongside her, not as a guest, but as a recipient, my name printed in gold ink. Jennifer Moore, advisor, advocate, architect of reform. I didn't think twice about accepting, not out of pride, out of precision, because this wasn't about celebration, it was about record. The ballroom at the Langston Hotel was filled with carefully dressed figures, city officials, nonprofit leaders, compliance officers, donors. No one knew my history, just my results. Frank and Diane were there too. I saw them before they saw me. Diane in navy, hair pinned back too tight. Frank in the same gray suit he used to wear when visiting my parent-teacher conferences, like he was a reluctant chaperone. They weren't seated near the stage. They hadn't been invited as guests. They were there as part of a local audit committee. Low-level, peripheral, but still there, still watching. My speech was the fifth that night. I didn't adjust the mic. I didn't start with "good evening." I didn't tell them I was grateful. I told them what silence costs. I was 17 when I first realized adults can lie without blinking. That guardianship isn't always protection. That signatures on paper don't always mean safety. I didn't tell anyone at the time. I thought surviving was enough. It wasn't. The room quieted. No one teaches you how to fight people who raised you, who called you ours with a smile, then called your savings ours with a signature. I built my career by tracking that signature, and eventually I made peace with what they took by building something no one could take again. I paused. Frank's face didn't move, but Diane blinked. Once, slowly. I didn't need tears. I didn't need regret. Just the quiet truth settling between us, that I'd made it, not through them, but despite them. When the crowd stood, I didn't scan for approval. I looked down, adjusted the note cards that were never needed, and walked off stage. Later, as people mingled, Frank approached. "I read the articles," he said. His voice was low, even, careful. They were harsh. I didn't respond. I just wanted to say He started again, but I cut him off. "You wanted control," I said. "You got it. You just didn't expect I'd outgrow your grip." He looked wounded, or maybe just tired. "We were scared," he offered, voice cracking slightly. "Scared you'd leave, that you'd forget us." I nodded once. "You were right about one thing," I said. "I did leave." Then I turned and walked away. Not out of rage, out of clarity. The public had seen the truth. I had made my record, and now I was done proving it. They tried calling after the gala. Twice from the landline, once from Diane's number. I didn't answer. The voicemails weren't apologies. Not really. Just soft admissions wrapped in excuses. We didn't know how to handle that much responsibility. We were under pressure with the medical bills. You always seemed so capable. We didn't think you'd need it. Need it. They still didn't get it. I didn't need the money. I needed the dignity of choice, the right to say what was mine and what was not. Their language was a defense, not an offering. But what came next surprised me. A formal letter. Attorney letterhead. Not a threat. An invitation. Diane and Frank were offering to sign over what little remained from the trust they hadn't already touched. A symbolic gesture, maybe. Or a strategy. I didn't care which. I declined through counsel. What mattered to me had already been taken, and I wasn't spending another minute pretending it hadn't. Sam saw the letter on my desk one morning. She didn't ask about it. She just said, "You don't owe anyone an ending." She was right. Closure isn't a reunion, it's a boundary. Still, I allowed one final meeting. Not out of hope, out of discipline. Because I wanted no unfinished conversations lingering in my head. We met in a neutral space. An empty conference room in a legal building downtown. Fluorescent lights, no drinks, no warmth. Diane opened with, "We wanted to say we're sorry." Frank added, "We did what we thought was best." I looked at them. "You did what was easy." They looked down. Diane tried again. "Is there any way to fix this?" I didn't raise my voice. "You can't return trust. You can only stop asking for it." She cried then, the kind of quiet, restrained crying she used to do behind a bathroom door when she thought I wasn't listening. Frank sat frozen. I didn't comfort either of them. Instead, I stood up, gathered my folder, and said, "I wish you peace." I don't wish you access." Then I walked out. Later that week, I hosted a dinner at my apartment. Small group, people who had actually been there: Sam, 2 colleagues, the legal assistant who stayed late helping with filings, and Leah, the first client who ever said, "You saved me." We toasted with sparkling water. I didn't talk about the inheritance. I didn't talk about the lawsuit. I talked about the scholarship I'd just funded for girls aging out of guardianship care. First round, 5 recipients, fully anonymous. They didn't need to know my story. They'd be too busy writing their own. The program launched in the fall. We called it Anchor because that's what I'd needed at 16. Not rescue, not charity, just a tether, a fixed point that didn't move when everything else did. The fund covered housing stipends, legal support, and basic financial literacy. We didn't ask for their trauma in exchange. They didn't have to earn stability. They'd earned it by surviving. We ran it through an independent trust, no names attached, no photo ops. I didn't want to be the face of anything. I just wanted to be the reason no one else woke up one morning and realized everything they were promised had already been signed away. A reporter requested a follow-up interview after the gala. I said no. They sent a second email, said the public wanted an update on the girl who sued her guardians and won. I replied, she didn't win, she rebuilt. Frank and Diane sent holiday cards that year, generic ones, gold script, phrases like "May peace find you" and "thinking of you during this season of light." They weren't signed. I didn't open them, but I didn't throw them away either. I placed them in a box labeled Record, alongside court transcripts, bank statements, and copies of my first financial advisory license. Not out of sentiment, out of structure. Because forgiveness, when it comes, should land on solid ground. The last time I saw them in person was a year later. A conference on guardianship fraud where I was speaking. They sat in the back. They didn't approach me after. But Diane clapped when I said, "Caretakers should not need applause to act with integrity. They should need a mirror." And Frank nodded when I closed with, "We do not heal by forgetting. We heal by holding people accountable and still choosing to live well." Afterward, Sam and I walked 3 blocks to the diner near the courthouse, the one with mismatched mugs and laminated menus. She ordered pancakes. I ordered coffee. "You did it," she said. "No," I corrected. "I'm doing it." That's the difference between revenge and repair. One ends with a door slammed shut. The other ends with you walking through a new one without flinching. Frank and Diane don't have access to my life now, but they know I'm no longer small, no longer afraid, no longer theirs. That's not bitterness. That's balance.